Baki the Grappler, Grappler Baki, or better known as just Baki nowadays, is a pretty simple series.
Poison hand technique. Let's fight in the phone booth. I have become liquid.
It's a basic fighting series that grounds itself in realistic grappling techniques.
My hand is a black hole, Triceratops stance, imaginary joints.
It's really just a coming-of-age story about a child who wants to surpass his father.
Invisible food, I gotta kill this giant mantis. We brought this caveman back to life.
Baki is absolutely fucking insane in just about every aspect you can imagine. Characters with feats of strength far removed from anything even remotely human, techniques that make no sense, being so focused that your imagination becomes reality, literal fucking possession and ghost magic. And yet despite all this absurd, ridiculous stuff, Baki continues to treat itself with absolute sincerity, presenting all of its bullshit as if it's simple, basic science. You see, the reason Baki can reach top speed so instantly is because he studied the cockroach, whose insides are liquid. Therefore, by imagining himself as a liquid and becoming as loose as possible, he too is able to achieve this tremendous speed. It's only fitting that a series so utterly insane has an equally insane story about its translation. Grappler Baki has been ongoing since 1991, and has its story segmented into separate manga parts similar to JoJo's Bizarre Adventure. However, unlike JoJo, we don't get a new protagonist each part, nor do we skip ahead a few years. From Grappler Baki to Baki Hanma to Baki Dao to Baki Dao 2, we're following just one man, not over the course of his entire life or even decades, but only a few short years. Somehow, throughout the courses of the Bush, Obama, Trump, and Biden administrations, the world of Baki has managed to only move ahead 5 years. Grappler Baki has been an ongoing manga series for over 30 years, and throughout that run, despite the multiple anime adaptations, the manga itself has only ever had one official English translation, that one being for Baki, also known as New Grappler Baki. Which means for 30 years, different fan translation groups have been fighting for the shiny, piss-golden throne of being the Baki translation group. Scanlation, a combination of the words scan and translation, is another term for fan translation. It's a practice of dubious legality where someone buys the proper, original release of a series in its native language, scans it into their computer, translates it, and replaces all the words, and boom, puts it back out into the internet for all to enjoy. As I said, it resides in a sort of legal gray area, similar to ROM hacking. It's technically illegal, and copyright owners could technically shut your shit the fuck down, but it really just depends on a case-by-case basis. Most of the time, when there's no official translation, like in the case of Grappler Baki, no action is taken. The main fan translation team behind Baki currently is Spinyback, and they only finally caught up to the active releases in September of 2020, nearly 30 years after the first chapter released. Now you may ask, why did it take so long? Is the series notoriously hard to translate? Did they have legal problems with Itagaki? Did they start super late? Were they just too slow? Maybe a bit of that here and there, but there is one main reason behind why the English translation of Baki took 30 years to catch up to the Japanese releases. The fan translation of Grappler Baki can only be described as an absolute war, a blood feud between rival clans like they were battling for the Iron Throne. The groups behind translating Baki have seen it all. DDoS attacks, doxing, death threats, poaching redraws, sniping releases, impersonations, fake chapter releases, Discord takeovers, stealing translations, IP grabbing, Bitcoin trading, attempts to hire dark web hackers. If you can think of it, someone has probably tried it to get their hands on the Grappler Baki crown. But who would do all of this? Who would go to such ridiculous, absurd extremes just to be the unofficial translator for a series about guys pissing on each other? Wildfang is the notorious group responsible for just about all of the shit I just told you about. More specifically, their leader, Ichido Raichan. Ichido is a very angry, bitter man who will openly lash out at anyone who dares to criticize him or do his job better than him. But let's embrace the idea of death of the author for a moment, even though that doesn't really apply here since Grappler Baki is not his series, he's just translating it. Let's put aside Ichido's personality and actions towards others for a second and just look purely at his translation of Grappler Baki. For a time, Wildfang was the uncontested top translator for the Baki series. If you looked for English scans online, chances are you'd be reading whatever Wildfang had put out. This, however, came with many problems. The first of which was that Wildfang preferred speed over quality. Their number one priority was getting the translations out as fast as possible. That doesn't sound too bad, right? You probably think that because you don't actually realize the amount of work that normally goes into a translation, especially fan translation. When you read a page like this, you likely don't even consider that originally all this overlaying text was in Japanese. That means that entirely different parts of the page were covered, and a fan translator can't exactly ask for a clean, textless copy. This is why fan translation teams have redrawers. Redrawers go over areas like this to get rid of the text for the next translated text to be inserted on top. But Wildfang ain't got time for that shit. No redraw is necessary, just slap the English text over the Japanese and call it a day. Now maybe you don't mind that, maybe you think, hey, if that's the price I gotta pay to get the chapters a day early, so be it. Fair, I can understand that. What if the price you had to pay was also a $150 paywall? Remember when I said fan translations were in a legal gray state? Well, Ichido said, hey, fuck it, and just full on started charging people for his illegal translation of someone else's work. His translations still usually leaked out onto various aggregator sites regardless, since anyone can upload them, and what is he gonna do, sue them for posting the content he's illegally charging people money for? Now maybe you're thinking, okay, the quality isn't great, but he's still getting it out quick, and doing a lot of hard work. Cut him a break, he deserves to make a living. Alright, I see you. You're a generous guy. And what if I told you that Wildfang's translations were not only super inaccurate most of the time, but that he intentionally changed dialogue of entire chapters and arcs to bend the story's narrative into what he wanted? Not only were Wildfang's translations rushed slop, not only were they often nonsensical, not only did you have to pay for them, but there were times when Ichido would step in and say, nah, Itagaki got it wrong, let me fix it, and change the story to his liking. Content warning real quick, Grappler Baki covers just about everything you can imagine. This includes rape. The main antagonist of the series, Yujiro Hanma, is notorious for the fact that he takes what he wants, always. A very important part of the series is that he rapes a woman named Diane, and she has a son, Jack, that grows up with the goal of killing his father. Ichido's a big fan of Yujiro though, and didn't like the idea of him being a rapist, so he made sure to twist the character's words around to make it clear that even though Yujiro did force himself on Diane, she totally liked it, because you know, Yujiro's just that much of a man. Baki is also infamous for being, perhaps hilariously unintentionally, homoerotic. Now that gets said about basically any series that involves dudes fighting, because, ha, muscular men making physical contact? Ew, gay! But I'd say it holds a bit more weight when it comes to Baki, given that two characters straight up make out during a fight to test who has a stronger bite. To this, Ichido said, "Nigga, you gay!" And did just about everything in his power to defeat the LGBT propaganda. This was his series, for manly men. No one in Grappler Baki is gay, then there's absolutely nothing that could ever be misinterpreted as homoerotic. I think a quote from the man himself explains his view best. During his short attempt to take over the translation of Kengan Ashura, a series in the same vein as Baki, Wildfang said the following. Nah, the Kengan Reddit is full of fake straight faggots and little boys in the closet trying to push a gay agenda that Kengan Ashura doesn't have and never owned. So, there you go. But this retranslation doesn't just extend to protecting fictional rapists and hammering down anything that could be misinterpreted as homoerotic. Wildfang would activate Heaven's Door on anything he felt was too gay. Baki growing stronger out of his love for Kozue? Gay! Oliver loving his girlfriend despite her growing fat? Gay! Yujiro supporting Baki and Kozue's relationship? Gay! Yujiro literally having sex with a burly-ass, hairy-ass man. Again, no, actually, retcon that. Yujiro's not gay, that was just like a metaphor for his masculinity devouring the other guys. For real, this motherfucker tried to rewrite Yujiro raping this burly-ass woodsman into not being gay. Anything Ichido didn't like or thought was too stupid was rewritten to his liking, and Baki is a series full of stupid shit. So to recap, for a long time, if you wanted to read Grappler Baki, at the best of times you were reading a rushed translation with frequently broken English, no redraws, words just slapped over the original Japanese ruining many pages, and you were either paying for it or waiting for it to be leaked. And at the worst of times, you were just reading some dude's Grappler Baki fanfic. If you want to know just how ridiculous and low quality his changes got, I think this page says it best. If you're not that into manga, you might not even notice anything that wrong at first. What's so bad about this page over the others I've shown you? Well, just the fact that this panel is stolen from a different manga. This motherfucker cut out a panel and just replaced it with one from Vagabond. Ichido is very proud of his quote-unquote translations and fixing of Baki, going as far as to credit himself as the guy who made Baki. I think at this point, you get the picture. The Wildfang translations were just about the worst possible outcome in every single category. But hey, you can't blame a guy for trying his best, right? So throughout the years, people obviously got sick of Wildfang's terrible translations and decided they'd take over and try to make some better ones. But for Ichido, this couldn't stand. I mean, how could he illegally charge people to read his fixed version of Baki if someone else was out there translating it for free with the actual dialogue and high quality redraws? Obviously, Wildfang would stand no chance if this was allowed to happen. Details and exact dates are going to get fuzzy here, because the absolute extent of Ichido's widespread war on anyone and everyone that ever even thought about translating Baki, or even just anyone who pointed out how shit his translations were, is absurd. Even to this day, people who attempt to collect and share the evidence are warned to just leave it be, because Ichido is well known as an absolute no-life that will dedicate years to harassing and doxing anyone he doesn't like purely out of spite. He's been known to LOIC people's personal websites for months at a time, DDoS his competitors' sites, and put a list of his enemies' names in the credits of his chapter releases to encourage harassment. When cyber attacks didn't work, he'd target any other series they happened to be translating and rush out a translation for it before them, which was an easy way to edge them out of the picture by getting his version uploaded to aggregator sites first, effectively silencing the true translations. And if he didn't have time for that, he'd just camp out their translations, steal them, and upload them as his own official work. Ichido has put dozens of small-time translators out of the hobby just to keep his grip on the Baki throne, to the point that there are only a few known instances of groups that have stood the test of time against him. Now I should clarify here, because I'm probably making Ichido sound like some badass mythical dark web hacker. Nothing Ichido's done or is capable of is all that impressive. Most of it is basic shit most people could learn to do pretty quickly, as long as they had no morals and a lot of time on their hands. The problem is that Ichido's harassment doesn't let up. He will continue his prodding little attacks for years if need be, until the group he's targeting decides it's just not worth the annoyance anymore. That and the fact that if he did manage to somehow get any of your personal information, he wouldn't hesitate to just attach it all in his translations under a list of his enemies. This meant that if you wanted to try and help make a good translation of Grappler Baki, or of any of the other series Wildfang laid his claim on, you had to face constant harassment, death threats, and script kiddie cyber attacks. And if you ever let any personal information slip, it would be broadcast to his entire shitty fanbase. He'd also try to sneak, quote-unquote, into his competitors' discords and poach artists and translators from them, which just about never actually worked because he's a terrible, greedy person whose offers basically always came down to, bro, just work for me instead, bro, trust me. When facts didn't actually line up with the reality he wanted, he'd just lie and make them up. When too many people saw through his bullshit to launch a campaign against them all, he'd just hit them with death threats and kindergarten-level insults. In the later years, any minor victory he had or even just felt he had, he'd immediately run to Reddit to brag about his incredible exploits. Unfortunately, Wildfang has gone through so many banned alts that finding just about anything remaining is nearly impossible. Ichido was a man determined to make Grappler Baki his. He'd relentlessly attack anyone who got in his way, he'd claim he made the series, and he'd even go as far as to say Keisuke Itagaki, the author of Baki himself, was on the official Wildfang team for clout. I'm going to try and bring you the story of how the Grappler Baki series came to be translated. However, due to so much of this happening so long ago, through countless alts, banned accounts, and deleted forum posts, the timeline is rough to put together. I had to go around asking questions in many discords, interviewing multiple people just to get the general idea of a timeline. But here you have the tale of translating Baki. We're taking you way back in the day, over 20 years ago, when manga aggregator sites barely even existed and the only way to get your hands on unofficial translations was sheer luck or following random forum posts. Wildfang uses this to build up a name and reputation for himself as the one and only available translator for Baki, though there were likely others who were harassed into silence and forgotten by time. Once Wildfang had enough of a following, he stopped releasing his translations for free and began charging for them on his website. However, there wasn't really anything he could do to stop someone from buying them and then anonymously posting them to the same boards he used to, which meant that even on these sites, his stuff still leaked out and he was just everywhere. So basically, if you bought into the Wildfang project's membership, you got the translations early. If not, you had to wait until someone leaked them. To this day, the only scans you can find for most of early Baki are what Wildfang put out decades ago. Most call this the dark age of Baki, but for Wildfang, it was his golden age. He was in charge, he was making money, he was the only supplier in town, and a lot of people didn't even know his translations were bullshit. But things would change drastically for Wildfang when Team Spinyback, another translation group, got a $70 donation. The donator asked them if they could translate the final part of Son of Ogre as it was coming to the close in Japan, and if they'd even continue to go forward with translating the upcoming Baki Dao series. They seemed to oblige their donator, drawing the ire of Wildfang. The translations were better, higher quality scans, more accurate translations, actual redraws instead of text slapped on text, all for free. But most importantly, they were rewriting his story. Wildfang couldn't have this, so he began paying hackers for a relentless DDoS attack on Spinyback's website, ultimately causing them to shut it down. This means most of the archives for this history are no longer available. This didn't stop them though. Even without their own website, Team Spinyback continued to work on the series and release their translations to the public through forums and aggregator sites. To counteract this, Wildfang actually began releasing his chapters to the public as well, to try and wash away Team Spinyback's translations. If they uploaded a new chapter, boom, he'd upload 2 so that he'd be sitting on top. If they released 2, he'd release 3. While Wildfang lacked the translation skills of Team Spinyback, he had the advantage of starting first and not giving a fuck about quality, and for fans awaiting translations, quantity is usually enough. A lot of people were fine with low quality scans as long as they got the new chapter faster. Plus at this point most people didn't know what a shit person Wildfang was, or that his translations were just straight up bullshit most of the time. But Spinyback remained strong and continued to release chapters, patiently building up an archive of actual real Baki chapters people could read. So when new readers began catching up, they began to notice problems. Why were the scans suddenly so much worse? Why were the translations no longer making sense? Why did the story fucking change? People started asking questions, and quickly also started to receive their answer. Wildfang. Wildfang's dirt began coming to light rapidly, and he eventually took to arguing on forum posts about how his translations were actually the true ones. However, unintentionally, he revealed some troubling information. Wildfang, straight up, does not know Japanese, like not even a little bit. Ichido Raichan is a fake name. He has been translating the series this whole time based on context clues, gut feelings, and unpaid work from actual translators. At one point, his main translator was an unpaid 15-year-old girl. Remember Wildfang's quote-unquote membership? Well, it turns out he offered an exclusive deal to those who could speak Japanese. He'd send you a few pages or panels now and then, and if you translated them for him, he'd waive your membership fee. Using this weird fucking tactic, he was able to staple together pages, panels, and chapters from different translators, using his own shit narrative as filler when needed. He'd Frankenstein together this horrific translation of Baki and was profiting off of it for years. The entire Baki community turned on him. Wildfang quickly became a joke of a translation source. To this day, if you visit the Baki subreddit, the second rule is no Wildfang scans unless absolutely necessary. Of course, this didn't actually stop Wildfang though. Even as his empire came crashing down on top of him, he did everything he could to attack those responsible, just out of spite. He'd continue his false translations for years, polluting the Baki ecosystem. He'd DDoS, LOIC, and dox anyone he could manage to get his hands on, and would pay or partner up with manga YouTubers to promote his scans. He'd create dozens of alt accounts using VPNs just to attack the Baki subreddit and the discords of his enemies. Wildfang was no longer even a translator, he was just a toxic rat thrashing about in its last moments. Yet through all this harassment, all these attempts to slow them down, and the endless cyber attacks, Spinyback continued steadily working forward with Baki, and eventually they caught up. Wildfang could no longer even dump out his preloaded chapters to try and thwart them anymore. He had actually fallen behind and lost the closest thing to an advantage he ever had, so he had to change his approach. He had to stop Spinyback at all costs. He ran to the forums of Mangadex, one of the top manga aggregator sites at the time, complaining about fucking basically anything he could. Spinyback's translations were fake, they were illegal, they were paying off people who ran the sites to promote their translations, they were racist, they were this, they were that. And when they wouldn't ban Spinyback for his claims, Wildfang attacked the sites themselves instead. To quote the man himself again, Mangadex is a totalitarian manga site from India, and they don't care about anything else because that's how miserable they are. Wildfang's days were clearly numbered, while Spinyback continued steady onward. Spinyback had endured the storm and won the war of attrition. They had reclaimed Baki from Wildfang's grasp. Even today, they're still releasing new Baki chapters as they become available. And while Team Spinyback can be considered the main rival to Wildfang, they weren't the ones who dealt the killing blow. You see, while Baki was Wildfang's pride and joy, what with him being the creator and all, he also tried to get his hands on a few other series. All of them were in the similar vein of seinen fighting manga. Out, Record of Ragnarok, and Kengan Ashura. He clearly wasn't beating Spinyback and his ego needed some stroking, so he targeted the group Hokuto no Gun, the scanslators for Kengan Ashura at the time. There had been delays in their releases due to health problems of the team's typesetter, and Wildfang thought this was his golden opportunity to issue a challenge and claim he would take Kengan off their hands and do it faster. He also decided the series should instead be called the Ashura of Kengan for whatever reason. Hokuto no Gun had already had a short run-in with Wildfang back in 2009, where he used an alt to try and buy his group some legitimacy by claiming he worked under Hokuto no Gun as well. Hokuto no Gun already knew about Wildfang's shitty practices and had previous bad blood, so when he issued this challenge, they put all hands on deck. Hokuto no Gun put all their best to work on Kengan, setting a ridiculous goal unheard of in fan translations. One chapter translated a day until it was done, far beyond anything Wildfang could have hoped to keep up with, even with his sacrifice of quality, even with his just lying about what it says. And they actually did it too. Wildfang didn't even try to keep up, but at the same time, he wasn't going to quit. He began using alts to infiltrate HNG's Discord, trying to poach their team members to come work for him in order to slow them down. For obvious reasons, this didn't even fucking come close to working. Everyone outright denied him and would save screen caps of his pathetic attempts to share around the group and laugh at, all while they somehow managed to keep up their insane one chapter a day schedule. I'd like to note here, you may have heard about Kengan before, but this was back when it was a small, obscure manga. A large part of Kengan's popularity was a direct result of the hype behind HNG's explosive release schedule. Every single day there was a new fight to read, a new discussion to be had. It was incredible and built a huge amount of momentum for the series. And Wildfang decided to try and turn this monumental L that he'd claimed this was all his grand plan. That he'd challenged them on purpose to speed them up and never actually intended to compete with them. That he just wanted more people to enjoy series he loved so dearly. He took to Reddit to let the people know they should be thanking him. That he was the mastermind who gave them Kengan. Hokuto no Gun responded by launching back an attack that would see him banned from Reddit, Mangadex, and just about any site relevant to him. In one swift move, Wildfang had lost the ability to claim to be the main translator for anything, and now the only place he could even try to release his shitty translations were anonymous forums where he'd endlessly get roasted as an absolute joke. By the time HNG had met their goal and finished Kengan, Wildfang was barely a memory, let alone a foe worth spending any energy on. They kept their promise and eventually moved on from Kengan once they lost interest, leaving the sequel in the hands of other scanslation groups. Wildfang is technically still around, the many sites that have banned him growing tired of shutting down his endless stream of alts, but no longer is he a threat to anyone or the big bad boogeyman of Baki translation. Today, Wildfang is like an ethereal spirit. Barely there, a voice whispering in the wind about how he didn't lose, promising a return that isn't coming. So here we are. Hokuto no Gun finished Kengan, and Spinyback is doing same-day release for new Baki chapters. We've entered the golden age of Baki translation, with just one group solidly in charge of releasing good, high-quality translations as soon as they can. It was a long battle, but it's finally over. Psych! Did you think we were done? The Wildfang project may be gone, but from the salted earth left behind of its remains, a sprout emerges. Overnight, just about everyone active on the Baki Reddit gets the following message. Help me. An eerie little message, the link took them to a hasty attempt at translating Baki Gaiden Scarface, a spin-off of Baki about the character Hanayama. Now this wouldn't really be much of a problem, since no one was actively working on it at the time, and some people were even excited for it. But there was one small, familiar problem. This motherfucker didn't know Japanese. He was doing the Wildfang classic, but with a modern spin. He was using a translation app, then for any panels the app didn't work on, he'd either wing it or run to a translator subreddit asking for help where needed. Obviously, this is an incredibly slow and ineffective method, which is why he spammed everyone in the Baki Reddit to help him out. Now, there's nothing really wrong with this so far, just a foolish guy trying to get some help translating a series he likes, right? That was until he threatened to hire dark web hackers to shut down Mangadex for removing his awful translations. If this wasn't already a pathetic sight, he actually went to Reddit to ask how he could hire a hacker from the dark web for the grand prize of $50. If you thought Wildfang was fucking stupid, this guy is like if you dropped a cinder block on Ichido's head. He had no clue how to do anything, from translating to hacking to even getting the most basic amount of help. One thing he did have was determination. And a lot of fucking free time. He then began trying to take over the translation of Baki Dao 2 from Spinyback, but not only were his translations wrong and in broken English, but he just made nonsensical decisions, such as coloring an entire chapter in rainbow for some reason, breaking the fourth wall to insult his readers, and straight up announcing characters are dead because he felt like it. There was never any hope for this motherfucker to start with, but he refused to give up anyway. The story of One Equals All is a story of just constant failure and tantrums. He attempts to demand Raws from the Spiny Back team and is immediately denied, so he makes vague threats. He appeals the removal of his chapters on manga decks, gets denied, and threats to hire a dark web hacker for $300. Actually, ends up only having $50, but you know, it's that money's money. I have no clue why he felt like he needed to tell them how much he planned to spend on the hackers, but it's a good thing his actual budget ended up being a sixth of that, or they would have been in big trouble. Failing at every turn, he then began what I like to call the flood. He joined so many discords on so many alts, it's actually fucking impossible to try and keep track of. He'd impersonate people by making alts with similar names to them, then have them say ridiculous over-the-top shit to try and get them banned. He'd join a discord with 30 alts, have one of them spam threats at the owner, and have all the other alts beg her to make his other alt a mod so it doesn't happen again. At some point, he had himself and a bunch of his alts, which he named cool shit like Agent 1 to 70, in a discord where he talked to himself as if they were the Legion of Doom, saying shit like, "Boss, should I move in for the attack? No, not yet, Agent 32. Why? Well, of course to screenshot this on yet another alt and quote-unquote leak the incoming attack to the discords of his enemies to show that he was a serious threat they should be scared of. He continued flailing about, making hacking threats, death threats, and for some reason his main one, rape threats. Remember when he tried to trick that one server into making him mod? Well, ironically, someone did this exact method to him on his own server and it worked. They then banned him and all his alts from it, destroying it. Getting desperate at this point, One Equals All finally leveled up his game. No longer would he have to ask someone on Reddit to be his scary dark web hacker assassin for $50, as he learned how to use an IP grabber. If you don't know what that is, basically it's a super basic method of getting someone's IP. You send them an image or a link, and if they follow it, you can see their IP, which can then be used to find their approximate location. He disguised his IP grabber link as a new chapter of the manga Out, another manga Wildfang tried and failed to get his hands on. One Equals All, failing miserably to take over Baki from Spiny Back, would try to branch out similar to Wildfang. And this is where I entered the story. Most of this video has been stuff I had to scrape together and search for to bring to light. Ironically though, this next part of the video is something I experienced personally, but unfortunately have very little to physically show. I was around back when One Equals All showed up and was floundering horribly, and after watching the spectacle for a few days, I decided to run a little test. Throughout this saga, One Equals All made one thing very clear. He was desperately looking for allies. Whether it was for hacking or translating, he was constantly looking for someone to recruit under his wing. I wanted to see what his actual plan was once he got that far, so I made my own alt on Discord, because I didn't want him having access to any of my actual shit. Unfortunately, I've lost the logging info from this temp alt and therefore just about all of the logs for this, so I'm just gonna have to recreate them for you. To start, I had to choose a profile picture and name that'd blend in. I couldn't just show up and offer my services in the middle of him getting his shit pushed in, it'd be too suspicious. Well, to be honest, I probably could, because this motherfucker is dumb as shit, but I thought it'd be more fun to do a proper James Bond infiltration, so I made up a character to play, Shinigami Reader X. Shinigami Reader was a fan of manga, but he wasn't your typical fan of manga. He only enjoyed the stuff for the high IQ individuals like himself, you know, Death Note, Vinland Saga, Hunter x Hunter, the high quality stuff that puts him apart from the rest. No silly shonen for this big boy, he was far too good for that. Shinigami Reader also prided himself on the fact that he took a few Japanese classes in high school, and was even taking further classes once he started college next month. I needed to make One Equals All think I was capable of translating, but not so capable that he wouldn't be able to fool me into doing whatever he wanted. I had to play the part of a manga-obsessed pseudo-intellectual, and so I set my profile picture to Crollo and logged in. With my new persona ready, I followed the many links One Equals All spammed out over the Baki subreddit and discords, until I finally found a link that actually still worked. He had inserted himself into the discord of a retired scanslator, using her name to give himself some more legitimacy. About 90% of the server was just his alts talking to each other, like a tumorous growth that had taken over. This is where he made the attempt to trick her into modding him and take over the server, like I mentioned earlier. I decided to try and privately DM her to warn her about him and his real intentions, but she told me that she already knew. She was basically just sitting back and pretending to be oblivious because she thought it was funny how shallow and garbage his plans were. Reassured that there was no actual danger for anyone in the server, I got back in character and began acting like a clueless transfer student who was working on his Japanese and wanted to get into translating. He immediately took the bait and then sent me through a ringer of alts, each one telling me to go to the next guy up the food chain, even though they were all very obviously the same guy. Eventually I reached the grand final boss, One Equals All himself, who let me know how lucky I was to get the opportunity to become their main translator for Out. it. It was a big deal though, so if I screwed it up at all, I was done. He said in order to test me, he'd send me the raws for a chapter that I would have to translate for free, in order to prove I'm worthy. Shinigami Reader was more than happy to work for exposure. After all, he was promised he'd be paid eventually once the series started taking off. Now I should clarify here that I don't actually know Japanese either. Luckily for me, I actually read all of Out already, and I knew 1=All also has no idea how to read Japanese. So, by using context clues of the story and panels, I just winged it and made up whatever seemed like it fit. However, I realized he was absolutely going to take whatever I gave him and release it to the public as his own work, and I was worried about people getting mixed up based on my false translation, something that these people had never considered. So I made sure to insert a few different lines here and there that were complete nonsense to make it clear the chapter was bullshit, you know, as long as you actually read Out, or had at least 40 IQ. I submitted my trial chapter to 1=All, and he approved, despite the flaws like when I had a character revealed he was the son of another character who's only a few years older than him. The one thing he had a problem with, however, was that I implied the character Achan was gay. As a joke, I had Achan start saying whoever beat him in a fight would get to be his boyfriend, with all the other characters sweating, getting excited over the idea. This was the only thing in the entire chapter he had a problem with, and he warned me very strictly that I was wrong on this, that Achan was not gay, and I was never to make any translations that might ever imply such again. But despite this, he put the chapter out as is, planning to just retcon it later, I guess. Unfortunately, however, he immediately became a laughingstock over the joke of a chapter, and this is where 1=All broke. He gave up completely on his plans to become a translator and make money like Wildfang had. Now he existed purely to get vengeance on those that mocked him. He no longer even tried on his fake translations anymore, he just completely made up the most stupid bullshit you could imagine, probably inspiration from what I gave him. All of this to get back at the fans of Baki who rejected him by putting out this garbage in place of new chapters wherever he could. He'd even edit panels around to change the story, declare characters dead, insert characters into fights they weren't part of, and bring other characters back to life. At some point, he even fake translated a one-shot Itagaki made about his time in the military with the most grade school level shit imaginable, then released it as a new Chainsaw Man chapter. This era of 1=All was by far the funniest and most actually enjoyable, but unfortunately he's gone through so many alts and bans that I can't even find the chapters anymore to show you. If there's one thing to take away from all this, I think it's that next time you're reading a fan translation, just remember all the hurdles they have to go through. Even with all this months and months of digging I did, I probably missed tons of minor fan translation groups that disappeared entirely because of people like this. And if this is what just a couple of idiots can do, imagine the kind of damage someone else could get away with. Anyway, I guess it's time for some recommendations. First up is Ashura's Verdict, which is about a young boy who tries his best to smile and do good deeds despite the fact that his life is basically fucking horrible. He's slowly starting to crack as he sees that his deceased mother's idea that karma catches up with everyone simply isn't true, and when he's given the key that can send people directly to hell, he decides that if the heavens will answer evil with silence, he'll be the one to punish them. Secondly, and you might have already heard about this one because it's fucking making waves, is Drama Queen. Now this one is kind of a hear me out because this shit is potentially sending a real fucked up message. However, I'm putting faith in them that they're going somewhere with this. I'm saying as little as I can because it's something you gotta see for yourself. But honestly, good or bad, this shit is gonna be a fucking wild ride. The last one is, ironically, featured in this video, Out. Out is possibly the most down-to-earth manga I've ever read, and that's because it's based on the story of a real-life delinquent. It follows Tatsuya Eguchi, a legendary delinquent in Japan who just got released from juvie and is struggling with his new life on the outside. The beginning couple of chapters are so raw and real that I really can't even properly put it into words. If you're into delinquent or fighting manga, this is one of the best. Alright, that's all from me. Sorry that shit took so long, but deep dives take a long time and hard drive switches do not go over smoothly. Peace.
If you saw me now, we should be terrified.